Welcome to my channel. A quiet mechanic at Redridge Air Command hides a past no one dares to ask about, until a single patch on her sleeve changes everything. When systems fail and pilots face death in the dark, her instincts prove sharper than any computer. Most new techs at Redridge Air Command learn to stay behind the yellow line on the tarmac, far from the rolling thunder of jet engines and the sharp stares of pilots. I didn't mind staying back. I just crouched beside the wheels of a Falcon 47, toolkit open, sleeves rolled, tightening the cap bolts by touch and memory. No one asked my name. No one had to. I was just the quiet tech, a wrench girl from Austria, just another immigrant tech transfer from a European aviation exchange program. My badge read, Lena Weiss, Line Assistant, Temp Civilian Maintenance. That title fit fine, better than what I used to be. Someone shouldered past me that day, a young officer in clean boots and too much cologne, while the F-47 rolled into position. He didn't say excuse me, just barked, out of the way, rookie. I didn't argue, just went back to pressure readings and gear strut checks. That's what I did, silence and checklists. It was safer that way. But then the wind kicked up and my jacket sleeve fluttered open. The old patch stitched into the lining peeked out, black field, white hawk, and 3 small silver bars beneath it. A nearby crew chief, old enough to have gray etched into every wrinkle, froze. His gaze narrowed like he'd seen a ghost. I tucked the sleeve back. The others just smirked at me. Weiss, you watch too many Top Gun reruns? One chuckled. You want front seat, you'll need 5 years of rank and a new life. That's what they saw. A skinny, brown-haired woman who brought cookies for night shift and logged oil pressure like gospel. They didn't know the patch I wore had once belonged to a squadron that didn't officially exist anymore. And that was the point. I had been at Redridge for almost a year. Never missed a shift. Never asked for cockpit time. I learned each aircraft like it had a heartbeat. I logged micro vibrations that nobody else noticed, cleaned AOA vanes with surgical care, and checked fuel temps by hand. I kept to myself. I didn't tell them I'd once flown through weather so bad that even satellites refused to track it. That I'd once landed with no lights, no NAV, no one left alive on my frequency. That I'd memorized every ridge, shadow, and wind current of the mountain range that had buried my unit. They didn't need to know that. My job now was on the ground. That was enough. Then came that F-47, tail number GY-92. Low-speed instability at 160 knots. The pilot called it in, a 0.3G vibration post-overhaul. Not severe enough to ground it. So they marked it as minor and cleared it for night intercept. I didn't argue. I simply waited for the sun to set. Just before takeoff, I found the pilot prepping alone. I pointed once at the underwing sensor and said, quietly, if you feel a shudder between 160 and 180, don't nose down. It's not stall, it's the bracket flexing. Keep 2 degrees positive pitch. Hold it for 4 seconds. He looked at me like I was nuts. You've flown her before? I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The next morning, I was scrubbing hydraulic fluid off a different Falcon's underbelly when he returned. Didn't even say thank you. Just stared at me for a beat longer than usual before walking off. Later, during a surprise inspection with brass on the line, a junior officer snapped at me in front of the squad. Leave diagnostics to the certified team, Weiss. You're not qualified for emergency assessment. I nodded, backed off. The wind caught my sleeve again, and that same patch glinted in the light. White hawk, silver trim, and the faded letters, WF-13. Whisper flight. The kind of patch that doesn't show up in official inventory. The kind you earn in the dark. The old chief set down his clipboard so hard the hangar echoed. Silence rolled over the ramp like thunder. And still, I said nothing. Because truth doesn't come through stories. It comes when a plane lands safe in fog. And the pilot whispers, she was right. To be continued. The week after the patch incident, the air was colder, partly from the oncoming weather front, but mostly from how people started looking at me. Not suspicious, just different. The older crew chief, the one who'd gone still when he saw my patch, started offering me his spot on checklist reviews. One of the junior pilots nodded at me during pre-flight. No one said anything directly, but I could feel the shift. Then the interference reports came in. Strange signal jamming off the Blackridge Mountains. Magnetics flaring. The forward radar station kept dropping contact every few minutes. Most of the squad brushed it off, just weather anomalies, low-priority stuff. But it wasn't. I'd seen those signals before, back when they fooled 3 aircraft into thinking they were 30 miles west of their true heading. Only one made it back. Night patrol went on standby. 2 Falcons prepped. A tanker was set to circle just south of the range. I went through the standard prep like always, but something in me had already shifted into another mode. The mode where everything counts. Where your margin is one misread bolt from someone not coming home. Fuel drift showed 5 degrees Celsius off mark. Yaw damper jittering at 210 knots. The AOA sensor on GY-92 was coated in the fine, glimmering dust you only get near the mountain range. Mineral dust kicked up from those granite ridges. The kind of dust that tells lies. I flagged it. Quietly. The young officer on duty waved me off. It's a training flight, Weiss. We're not flying into the teeth. Save it for morning diagnostics. That's when I should have backed off. That's what the patch taught me. Choose your moments. But at 2,240 hours, the training scramble turned real. A cargo lifter carrying high-clearance hardware lost NAV entirely over Blackridge. They had no signal, no visuals, no radar. 2 F-47s were rerouted to intercept and guide them in. Weather was worsening. Rain slicked the tarmac as the scramble alarm howled. I saw the dust on the AOA again, just as the crew fired up the turbines. It reflected wrong, scattering light against the wing surface at a crooked angle. That kind of wrong can cost a life. I grabbed cloth, alcohol, and moved fast. Cleaned it. Blew the moisture off. Recalibrated with a hand tool most didn't bother carrying. Hey, the same officer from earlier barked. Get off the line. You're not certified for pre-flight clears. I didn't stop. Just stepped back when done. The wind hit my jacket again. The patch slipped into view. And suddenly, he didn't have much else to say. One of the older pilots saw it too. He approached slowly, eyes locked on the insignia. How long were you with Whisper Flight? He asked. My voice barely made it past my throat. Long enough to know a fog-dusted AOA will lie to you. He didn't ask more. At 2,305 hours, GY-92 hit 170 knots in ascent, briefly wobbled, then steadied. Just like I said it would. Up in the ops center, radar screens were chaos. Interference pinging all over. AI routing vectors into blind spots. The controller, a green second year, was about to vector the escort toward 070. I couldn't stay silent. I unfolded the hand-drawn map I kept tucked in my jacket. One I'd spent weeks building from wind reports, storm shifts, and terrain shadows. The interference reflects off the northern peak. It returns in 6 to 8 second waves. If you send them 070, you're flying blind into a vortex belt. They looked at me like I was crazy. Try 090, I said. Hold at FL 240 for 40 seconds, then swing to 085. You'll drift right 3 degrees, but you'll miss the turbulence pocket entirely. An officer frowned. You're basing that on what? Feelings? The old chief stepped in. Give her 1 minute. At 2,346 hours, the signal sharpened. The cargo lifter locked onto radar. The escort held formation. And just like that, the night calmed. They didn't celebrate out loud, but the silence in the room was reverent. Later, while the aircraft rolled back and under a curtain of freezing rain, I stood waiting in the parking bay, toolkit in hand. The pilot stepped down, helmet under arm, eyes on my patch. You've flown through this stuff before, haven't you? He asked. I nodded. No lights, no radio, and no one left behind me. He didn't say anything else, just walked past with a quiet kind of respect. I didn't feel like a ghost then. I just felt like someone who remembered what mattered most. To be continued. After that night, I noticed small changes. Nothing loud, nothing official, but the crew started cleaning their AOA veins before startup every time. Paper maps, which had vanished for years, reappeared on the walls of the ops room. A laminated checklist labeled Night Ops. Human factors quietly joined the standard protocols. No one said it was my doing. They didn't have to. We all knew. I stayed quiet. I always did. But I started marking wind shifts on a new map, hand-drawn again, taped to the inside of my toolbox lid. I noted pressure drops, how the ridge line affected radar shadows, and what interference patterns repeated during each moon phase. Not because anyone asked, but because I owed it to the ones who never made it back. I started taking more night shifts. That's when things usually went wrong. Back when I flew, darkness was both an ally and a liar. It hid you from the enemy, but also from the runway, from rescue, from reason. It taught me one truth that I never forgot. You don't need to see the way if you can feel the path. I remembered that every time I listened to a turbine spin up, I could tell you if a compressor fan was off by 0.5 millimeter just by how the pitch shifted under full throttle. Some of the younger pilots laughed at that, said I had aircraft ESP. They didn't know what it was like to trust a machine with your life, night after night, with no margin for error and no second chance. That's why I never argued when they mocked me. I just tightened bolts, cleaned sensors, and watched for dust on the vanes. But others had started noticing. Lieutenant Harper, who once called me the line wrench with fantasies, asked me to double-check his Falcon's diagnostics after a long sortie. Didn't say it directly, but I could see it in his eyes. He'd felt that mountain turbulence, and he hadn't forgotten who guided him out of it. One night, the commander called me in. A backroom briefing, low light, no formalities. There was a file on the table. He tapped it once. "Weiss, are you WF-13? I didn't lie. I just looked out the window. "I'm someone who knows how to bring a jet home," I said, "even when nobody else believes it can make it." He nodded once and opened the folder. It held old reports. Classified. Sealed. One was from Ridgepoint Intercept 2018, marked with a red stamp. Decommissioned unit. Whisper flight. There was thermal drone footage. Grainy, distorted, but in it, a single aircraft landed in blackout conditions, then turned and taxied its lights toward a crippled cargo plane, lighting a path with its own engines. That was the night the unit died. But the cargo plane made it home. I was the only one who walked away from that op. Since then, I'd never touched a stick. Never flown again. Never asked. Until now. He slid a new envelope toward me and signed, unofficial. A request. To return to the cockpit. Not for combat. Not for the glory missions. Just to teach. Instructor slot. Night vector program. I didn't answer him. Just traced the corner of my patch with a gloved hand. The one I'd restitched myself with white thread after we lost call sign 12. That patch wasn't just mine. It belonged to the ones I couldn't bring back. But maybe now, I could bring someone else home. To be continued. I didn't say yes to the instructor slot. Not allowed, anyway. But a few days later, I showed up at Hangar 4 with my old jacket freshly sewn. The patch was still there, WF-13, White Hawk, black field. But this time, I wore it openly. I didn't ask for permission. I just walked into the simulation bay, opened the terminal, and pulled up a set of exercises I'd been building in private for over a year. No one had ever seen them. They weren't in the official curriculum. But they were designed for one thing only: flying in the dark when the world goes silent. The program was called Blackout Vector. My first session, I didn't fly. I sat in the rear instructor seat, headset on, map in hand. A young pilot named Beckett took the stick. Cocky, sharp, all instinct, no rhythm. Exactly the kind of pilot who trusted his displays too much. "Is your AOA clean?" I asked before takeoff. He blinked. "System says yes." "System doesn't fly the jet. Clean it yourself." He muttered something about old-school methods, but he cleaned it. 30 minutes later, the sim ran a magnetic interference scenario, and the AOA glitched mid-approach. Beckett started to panic. The Falcon veered left. "Hold 090 for 4 heartbeats," I said in his ear. "Then swing to 085. Don't fight the turbulence. Surf it." He did, and he landed. When the canopy lifted, he stared at me like I'd reached into his mind and pulled him out of a nightmare. But I didn't say, "I told you so." I just handed him a rag. Clean it before every run. The next night, a real mission came through. A medical evac needed escort through freezing rain and low cloud. All systems glitchy. Fog had taken down the lifter's nav. The onboard AI recommended a leftward arc, vector 070. But I knew what 070 meant over that terrain. It meant dragging the aircraft through a vertical shear zone. Death by instruments. I stayed in the ops room, headset on, coin in hand. Not the kind you spend, but a round metal token with carved edges. No lights, still land. Something I carried as a reminder. Not of the crashes, but of the ones who survived because someone stayed calm. Vector 090, I told the pilot. Hold it for 4 more heartbeats. Then correct 5 degrees east. Silence. Then, copy. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then the sound we all waited for. Wheels hitting tarmac. Screaming rubber on wet asphalt. A save. They all cheered. I didn't. I just marked my map, updated my logs, and cleaned the sim booth. Later that night, Beckett found me in the maintenance bay. I panicked, he said. When the instruments went sideways, I froze. But your voice. He paused, staring at the patch. It felt like someone who'd been through it before. I looked up from my torque wrench. That's what we're here for. We bring each other home. But you weren't even in the cockpit. I gave him a small smile. Sometimes you don't have to be. To be continued. It wasn't long before people started showing up early. Not for briefings. For something else. I didn't advertise what I was doing, but word travels fast at Redridge. The younger pilots, Beckett, Suarez, Kim, started lingering after sim runs, watching how I marked wind curls by hand, how I calculated pressure deltas without touching a display. One evening, Beckett asked, "Where do you get all this?" I held up the map. It looked more like art than a chart. Hand-drawn isobars, interference scars, turbulence loops, and a dozen ink-scribbled notes that no AI system would ever understand. Experience, I said. The kind you can't back up to a server. So, I started holding informal sessions, just a few at first, quietly, inside the weather room after hours. We called it dark navigation. No slides. No lectures. Just red pencils, hand calipers, and instinct. Learn the ground before you fly above it, I told them. When everything fails, muscle memory and wind are all you've got. We practiced landings with the power cut. We talked through what to do when the GPS is blind, when the AOA lies, when the terrain radar flickers and says you're flying level but your guts say otherwise. And they listened. Because I didn't speak theory, I spoke from scars. These weren't procedures. These were survival habits forged in missions that never made it into reports. Some of the older officers didn't like it. One called it folklore. Another rolled his eyes at my paper maps. But the new generation leaned in. They didn't want war stories. They wanted to know how to come home when everything else said they wouldn't. And I gave them that. Not because I needed recognition, but because I remembered what it felt like to be the last voice in the headset and know that if you said the wrong thing, someone wouldn't make it. One night, after a sim, Suarez approached me with shaking hands. "Ma'am." I saw it. The blackout. My NAV blinked out, and I swear my chest locked up. "But your words, your voice, it was like..." He didn't finish. I just nodded. "You kept flying. That's what mattered. Not what I used to be, but what I still was. A guide in the dark. To be continued." By the end of the month, my maintenance log had more coffee stains and thumbprints than entries. I was too busy, marking routes, revising sim scenarios, coaching cadets through blindfolded landing drills. Not literally blindfolded, but that's what I called it when we pulled power halfway through descent and told them, fly by feeling, not by numbers. One of them, an Academy standout named Lynn, nearly broke down mid-sim. Her instruments went dead, comms glitched, and the cockpit filled with artificial ice warnings. I could hear her breath quicken. "I can't see anything," she whispered. "Then listen," I said calmly. "Feel your own rhythm. Count to 4. Drop the nose 2 degrees. Now trust your hands." She did. And when the Falcon wheels touched down on simulated wet runway at the edge of margin, she gasped like she'd surfaced from deep underwater. After the session, she didn't say anything. Just hugged her helmet like it was a lifeline and sat quietly. "You flew that," I said, kneeling beside her. "Don't forget it." She nodded. "You ever do that for real?" I didn't answer. I just tapped the patch on my shoulder. She understood. Because by then, the patch wasn't a secret anymore. Everyone on base knew what WF-13 meant. Whisper Flight. The unit that went dark over the Blackridge Range. The squadron with no official records and no survivors, except me. They all knew the story now. How we'd landed in blackout. How we guided others using only our lights. How I stitched the corner of my patch back on with white thread so I'd never forget who didn't make it. And they respected it. But they never treated me like a ghost. Not anymore. They treated me like a map keeper. A voice in the dark. A living logbook of everything that couldn't be programmed into an AI. Because systems fail. But humans? Trained right, we don't. One afternoon, an older mechanic, Juno, a crusty lifer with a voice like gravel, brought me something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a new patch, Black and silver, same hawk, newer thread. You've earned a clean one, he said. I looked at the old one on my sleeve, its frayed edges and ghost-stitched corner. I shook my head. I don't need a clean one. Juno raised an eyebrow. It's not supposed to be a trophy, I said quietly. It's a promise. I hung the new patch on the maintenance wall, right next to a hand-lettered sign. No lights. Still land. That was the creed. That was the call. To be continued. Things changed after that winter storm. It wasn't just the skies that went dark. The entire region, 3 states, 7 airfields, multiple control towers, lost NAV guidance in a chain reaction blackout caused by a massive geomagnetic spike. Satellites went blind. AI routing failed. And worse, several aircraft were mid-flight with nowhere to land. I was off shift when it hit, but my feet were already moving before the alarm finished its second tone. Inside the ops center, chaos reigned. Radios overloaded. Emergency protocols scrambled to reassign landings. One jet had declared minimum fuel. Another, an older trainer aircraft, was circling with a rookie pilot and no functioning terrain map. Someone shouted, "Redirect them east. Nearest strip still has partial lights." "No," I snapped, stepping forward. East vectors over open fields and flooded roads. One thermal shift, and they're down in swamp. Eyes turned toward me. Some surprised, some not. I grabbed a grease-smudged paper map from my locker, my own hand-marked layout of safe glides, ground elevations, and alternate approach corridors. It didn't look like much, but I trusted it more than any glowing screen. Vector them 248, drop to FL 160, hold for 90 seconds, then swing north. You'll pick up wind drag and gain glide slope. "How do you know that'll work?" a tech asked. "I don't." I looked him straight in the eye. "But I've done it." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right." And just like that, Command trusted me with 4 aircraft. I talked them in, one by one. Their comms were shaky, pilots on edge, eyes flickering over instruments that offered nothing but lies. "Lena, I've lost my vector. Where's the line?" "You don't need a line. Count 5 heartbeats. Then roll into heading 253. You'll feel the drop. Don't fight it. Just write it down." One by one, they landed. Some rough. One tail heavy. One dead stick. But none crashed. And that night, nobody asked me where I learned it. They just let me finish my shift. Quiet. Focused. Sweating more from memory than from effort. Because the truth was, I'd done it before. Back in the dark. Alone. When no one answered. The difference was, this time, I wasn't the one flying. But I was still keeping them in the sky. To be continued. After that blackout, something shifted in the base culture. Not dramatically, no speeches or medals. But quietly, pilots started coming to me before runs, even if they didn't need repairs. They'd ask about wind layering, cloud distortion, even gut feel reads on low-pressure turbulence. I never told them what to do. I just showed them how I used to survive. The philosophy spread like wildfire. Tech can fail. Training stays. Someone pinned a copy of my hand-drawn turbulence chart to the weatherboard. Another pilot duplicated my blind descent checklist and laminated it. I never asked who. Didn't need to. They weren't following me. They were learning to trust themselves. Each week, our dark navigation sessions filled faster. Some nights, we had more students than seats. I taught by feel, by case, by scars. Lessons from the whispered days that hadn't died, just changed. Count the pulses, not the alarms, I'd say. If the wind hits harder on your right wing, don't readjust the nose. Roll your wrist and feel it. Sometimes they got it. Sometimes they needed more. But always, they came back. One night, I found Lynn, the cadet who once froze in sim, sitting beside a new recruit, showing him how to read pressure by cloud shape alone. "Ma'am," she said, spotting me. "I told him about your storm landing. The one with no runway lights." I nodded. "You ever have to do it?" "Not yet," she said, then paused. "But if I do, I think I'll know how." I wanted to tell her something profound, something about what it means to fly by instinct, to let go of fear and lean into the unknown. But instead, I just said, "Good," and walked away, because it wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I wasn't flying the jet. I was helping someone else learn how. And for the first time, I realized something. That was Flight 2. To be continued. Sometimes I still hear the old turbines in my sleep. The model from the original Whisper Flight Falcons had a distinct resonance, something between a hum and a growl. You don't forget a sound like that, not when it carried you through lightning and silence and back again. But these days, it's not the sound that wakes me. It's the memory of silence. The moments when no one answered my comms. When I realized I was the last bird in the sky and the only voice on the frequency. Those nights shaped me, but they don't haunt me anymore. Now they guide me. Because I know someone, somewhere, will be flying through that same silence. And maybe I can be the voice they hear this time. After the blackout event, the base quietly started a new directive. Unofficial, unannounced, but clearly influenced by someone upstairs. A line was added to the pilot prep checklist. Consult with DarkNav Advisor if operating in unstable NAV environments. They didn't name me directly, but they didn't have to. I had become a part of the system, a part of the muscle memory of Redridge. One morning, I found a note in my toolbox. No name, just folded into a cleaned cloth. I was about to follow AI to 070. Your voice pulled me to 090. Still alive, still flying. Thank you. I kept that note, taped it to the inside of my locker beside the old patch. The patch doesn't hold power. It's just fabric and thread. But what it represents, that stays with me. A promise to guide. A responsibility to speak up when systems lie and lives are on the line. That's why I never pushed to fly again. There was nothing to prove. Because every time one of them landed safely by remembering something I taught, I was there. In the cockpit, in the comms, in the back of their mind where calmness lives when panic tries to take over. And that meant more than any flight hours. I wasn't whisper flight anymore. I was something better. The reason there would always be more Falcons. To be continued. The sun had dipped low over Redridge when I stepped into the maintenance bay, the sky a bruised mix of purple and burnt gold. Another class had finished, young pilots eager, a little too loud, still learning. They filed out with maps in hand and grease on their uniforms, looking like I'd looked once, before everything changed. I stayed behind, wiping down my tools, checking one last hydraulic line, listening to the hum of the base winding down. That's when Beckett walked in. Helmet under one arm, face serious. They sent me into fog today. Full radio blackout. I looked up, nodding slowly. How'd it go? He gave a small laugh, more disbelief than humor. I panicked at first. Then I heard your voice in my headset. Except, you weren't there. I just remembered what you said. Count the beats. Trust the feel. Stay level. I did. I nodded again, my hands still moving. You brought it back? He raised his chin, proud but humble. Wheels down. Safe. That's flying, I said. Not the takeoff. Not the throttle. The return. He stood silent for a moment, then asked, Ma'am, don't you miss it? Being up there? I looked past him, out toward the rows of parked aircraft catching the last rays of sun. A soft breeze shifted the air, lifting the edge of my patch. I used to think flying was about holding the stick, I said softly. About making the call, banking into storms, beating the odds. And now, I glanced at him. Now I know, it's about bringing people home. Sometimes that means being in the cockpit. Sometimes it means being the voice that gets someone else through their worst moment. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, understanding more than his years should have allowed. Later, after the hangars emptied and the runway lights blinked on, I hung my old patch beside the new one on the wall in our tool room. Beneath it, I wrote in black marker. No lights. Still land. For those we couldn't bring back. For those we still can. That wall wasn't a memorial. It was a promise. Because this story, mine, yours, anyone who's ever had to guide instead of lead, support instead of shine, it's not about what we used to do. It's about what we still choose to do. Every single day, to be the reason someone makes it home. And if, someday, the lights fail again, and someone's flying blind, I'll be ready. Because sometimes, the most important flights happen with your feet on the ground. And the most powerful pilots? Never even touch the controls.